we need technologists to work together with policymakers, right, to make legislation and regulation and so on that actually makes sense, that will actually be successful at reaching the stated and common goals, right, that will be implemented and that will have positive effects.
Right there, you sort of see this disconnect, right? On one hand, people are pushing to take capability with more and more AI. On the other hand, businesses are still trying to wrap their heads around what to use, how to use it, and when to use it, and where to use it. So I kind of see this disconnect. Is I think on both sides, it's almost like you need to turn this unknown into a known unknown, if you know what I mean.
And one thing that I hear a lot too, and I'm sure you hear this a lot as well, Gary, is this idea that regulation hampers innovation, right? And that by regulating, we necessarily are not going to be able to be as innovative or innovative. And that's just a fallacy. So there's many ways or many examples in which regulation and so on actually spurs innovation. So there's a fallacy that, you have to think through whose interest does it benefit to kind of push this rhetoric, right? And to push this kind of idea forward on a global scale, right? What are we missing out? What are we losing out? And what innovation are we losing out on because we are not regulating?
So I think that's what we need to do more of, by collaborating, doing stuff together, experimenting in a place that is reasonably safeguarded and protected, then we can at least take it forward.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Taide, and today we're diving into one of the hottest and most challenging topics of our time, artificial intelligence. To guide us through this conversation, we have two incredible guests. Carmen Domingues, who served as a senior technical advisor on AI at the White House and holds a bachelor in applied math from Harvard, a master's in data science from Columbia, and is currently pursuing a second master's in AI ethics and society from the University of Cambridge in the UK. She's passionate about critical thinking, the economic and geopolitical impacts of artificial intelligence. And joining her, we have Garry, Chief AI Officer at Venture Lab, where AI is applied to industries like manufacturing, medical devices, construction, food production, and mining. He holds a Master of Science from Carnegie Mellon University, and he believes responsible AI is not just about ethics, it's also a competitive advantage when done it right. Hi, Carmen. Hi, Garry. How are you doing today?
Hi, guys. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today with you.
Anyways, it's really amazing to have you both here with us. And, we have this great mixture of people from both academic and government side and politics and the industry side as well. So, let's begin by Carmen. Carmen, you've had this incredible experience working on AI policy at the White House. And, your academic background in AI ethics is just as impressive, right? So what originally sparked your interest in bringing together technology, policy, and ethics? And when you look back, was there a moment in your career that made you think AI is going to reshape everything?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's not just a one single sort of aha moment. It was really a build up, right? You mentioned my background. I won't repeat it, but you mentioned academically. I also spent 15 plus years of my life in the private sector before coming to government, right? And through that work, I was consulting in AI and AI strategy and, developing and implementing AI projects and products and solutions to clients and startups and so on. And I've started noticing oftentimes clients coming to us and being like, well, I want to use AI. And I would be like, okay, great. Do you understand what AI is? Or why do you want to use AI, right? And then oftentimes through conversation, and I see Garry nodding, oftentimes through conversation, it would become clear that they didn't really understand what AI was, what it could do, what it could not do, right? And this was already true years ago. And this is especially become especially true since, ChatGPT and LLMs, and we'll talk about that, large language models and generative AI and all of these things, right, that I'm sure we'll go deeper into. And I started getting a lot of questions, from also my friends around the pandemic time, asking me like, what's this algorithm thing? So what's really AI, right? Because a lot of news pieces started coming out around how AI was being used in HR processes, right, to select resumes and so on for interviews, et cetera. And I was getting a lot of these questions, and I just kind of felt like, well, I have all this academic background. I also have, professional background from, my professional experience working for a lot of these organizations. So I was getting a lot of these questions from clients, friends, right? And it started becoming clear to me that a lot of things that were obvious to me because of my background, both academic and professional, wasn't obvious to other people. And there seemed to be like a true kind of misunderstanding of what AI was and what it could do, what it could not do, and so on. And I just kind of felt like that was sort of a bit of my duty, right, as a technologist, as somebody who understood it, to share that knowledge with other folks. And I started doing, some AI communication work here on social media. And it was around the same time that, it was the pandemic time. There was a proposed bill in the Senate to try to curb health-related misinformation on social media during pandemic times. And I read that bill. It's like, great, we're moving the right direction. And I read that bill and I realized that it made no technical sense. So I was like, well, we need technologists to work together with policymakers, right, to make legislation and regulation and so on that actually makes sense, that will actually be successful at reaching the stated and common goals, right, that will be implemented and that will have positive effect. So I'll leave it here for now.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And, Garry, from manufacturing to medical devices, you've seen AI applied across many, many different industries, right? So what has been your most eye-opening experiencing leading AI implementation? And also, like just I asked Carmen, did you have any aha moments figuring, when AI is going to reshape everything from now on?
First off, before I answer, I just want to give you a bit of background because the answer is not that straightforward. At VentureLab, at any point in time, we work with about 100, 150 startups and businesses. So on one hand, some are trying to use AI in the product to sell to their customers. On the other side of the equation, there are businesses that have been around for a long time. They're looking to adopt AI. So depending on your perspective, that insight varies a little bit. So let's start off from the founder side, people who are actually using AI in the technology. Well, let's put it this way. Entrepreneurship is already very difficult, as you know. Building stuff in your basement, in your garage, and now trying to find customers, trying to get them to pay is no simple task. And now you throw AI into the mix. And the question often comes up, wait, do I lead with AI? Do I sell the product with AI? Or do I leave it later? Because oftentimes, sort of like you can observe, sort of there are different waves of maturity of the businesses or the conversation. Oftentimes, sometimes you look at the slide deck, they say, I'm AI, buy my product, But at some point, you realize, obviously, this is just really one vehicle for you to do a better job to help your customers, to delight your customers. So the fundamental business challenges and issues and solutioning and all that do not change. It just means that you have this catalyst, this latest and greatest capability that may be allowing you to do things better, faster, more responsibly, more transparently, and so on. On the other side of the equation, where there are businesses they're looking to adopt, the striking experience that I find is these are like really deep advanced manufacturing companies. They're using robotics or using really precision equipment and so on. But yet, there's an element of, what's the right word for it? Hesitation, or shall I even say in some case, a fear of adopting AI. And because, well, for many reasons. One is life is good. Why change? My customers are paying me. I'm doing well. Why now? Why do I need it? Or how? Where do I use it? So there's so many questions, and and it's just easy just to not do anything. So, right there, you sort of see this disconnect, right? On one hand, people are pushing to take capability with more and more AI. On the other hand, businesses are still trying to wrap their heads around what to use, how to use it, and when to use it, and where to use it. So I kind of see this disconnect. And I think if you were to sort of look at overall, though, business is business, you still need to solve a company's problem. But I think the key, and which leads me to the aha moment, is I think on both sides, it's almost like you need to turn this unknown into a known, if you know what I mean. In the sense that, what you're working with, then you can figure out what to use, how to use it, if you want to use it. But if it turns out to be this like big black hole and you don't know what to do, then you're kind of like stuck, right? So I think that's how I see it.
And on the same time, there's this big push from everywhere, right? You have, when you're within a company, you have the push from usually, the higher level saying you have to use it somehow. I don't know why, I don't know what for, but use it. From the founder side, it seems like you're not going to have any chance in getting any sorts of investment if AI is not appearing somehow on the roadmap, right? So it's kind of, you have all the forces pushing, but I completely agree with you. And it's just getting the known unknowns instead of the unknowns. Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about the need to do it. So
yes.
How much of that is talk? How much of that is doing? But anyways, Carmen, you want to jump in?
Yeah,
exactly.
I'll add another layer to this, right? To the point that Garry started, kind of referring to. Maria, you went a little bit further into, is that AI is oftentimes being sold, at least being perceived. I think there's a combination of, kind of to Garry's point, businesses are businesses, right? They exist to make money, and we have this sort of fascination, if you will, with AI. I think some of it is cultural from, sci-fi and things like that. And businesses take advantage of that, right? They kind of sell AI oftentimes as this sort of magic tool, or the business they're producing the AI, right? Or selling it to not just, end customers like, us, each of us, but also to businesses as like, you're going to use AI in your company, you're going to solve all your problems, right? You're going to be able to fire a bunch of people, cut your costs, expedite your processes, increase your productivity exponentially, and so on. And in some cases, that may very well be true, right? There will be gains to be made and so on. But there's then that disconnect of people not really understanding what it is and what it can and cannot do, understanding that it's not a magic wand. It's not like, you push a button or snap your fingers and it all comes into place somehow. And, AI agents, especially now, right? It's not like you push a button, bring an AI agent into your company as if it was like a robot that you just, carry into your company, push a button, and then all of a sudden is going to, solve all your people problems, solve all your processes problems, right? Think of new products. It's not going to do everything for you. It's going to be potentially very helpful for certain parts of your process, for certain, use cases and applications, but not for everything as a whole. So understanding how to combine the AI agents and the AI tools, more generally speaking, the different types of algorithms, understanding that, for example, large language models are very helpful for some use cases, but traditional predictive machine learning models are much better for others, right? Or much more efficient and ROI effective for other use cases and applications. So understanding which one is which and what type of tool works where and how, what systems you need to implement them, right? Again, you need to have proper infrastructure, technical infrastructure. You need to have proper HR, human capital,
the knowledge, exactly.
Like the knowledge, not just to operate, but then to use it, not just to operate it, like create it technically, but also to use it properly. So understanding all of these components so we can understand like how AI can actually be helpful.
Yeah, so Garry mentions about disconnects, right? And we have so much in place here. So how do you see collaboration between, you have policymakers, technologists, business, the investors and the startups, but evolving to ensure AI truly benefits society, really? And there's always this dilemma, which I'd love to know your inputs as well, because, when we see some regions in the world going more protective and having, a lot of policies in place to, in order to protect the market and the humans, right? But playing against regions that are more loose and barely have any type of protections, and you can really compete against that. So there's always this balance between, the policymakers and let the market innovate as well. So I'd love to know your thought on that, and how could those parts be working better together? And, feel free, whoever would like to start first.
It's a multi-part question, so I'll try to answer them. I think I look at it from sort of like the ground level, like companies trying to deploy or companies trying to adopt AI. And I'll start off again on the ones that are building the tech. I think the biggest disconnect that I see is the road mapping, if you will. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm a Canadian-based tech company. I want to expand to the US. I want to expand to India or to Europe. Like, there's all these policies, and I need to make sure that my tech is in compliance with all of that. So, having that understanding, knowing when I need to do what, and even within that broad, ISO 42001 AI standard, like, do you do all of it? Do you do an aspect of it? So really figuring out that roadmap for that compliance or adoption, I think is very important. That's one thing that I see. The other thing I also want to highlight is to your point about how do we address some of that. I may be a little biased, but that's why at our ecosystem, we're trying to champion this notion of a sandbox, basically where people can come in and play, because you learn by doing. You actually get to know what you're working with by doing. Without that, like, it's just a black box, right? So we want to do it in a safe, responsible, transparent way where companies can come in and try it out. Like, imagine a case, let's say you're a fintech company trying to sell into the bank. I'm not the only one, but I think many people will experience getting bogged down on the compliance department. You need to talk to the IP department first before they even want to get to look at your tech. Imagine if there's a place where we have some of those guardrails in place. Now we can at least ease that adoption, that conversation, and basically peeling these different layers of the onion so that we can get to the crux of the matter. Can this AI-powered widget help me, help my business? So I think that's what we need to do more of, by collaborating, doing stuff together, experimenting in a place that is reasonably safeguarded and protected, then we can have these take it forward.
Yes, I will kind of sign, under whatever Garry mentioned, or everything that he mentioned. But so I'll talk a little bit about the sort of potential cooperation between academics, policymakers, and businesses, right? So as someone who has been and navigated through all of those environments, right, I have kind of frustrations that I carry from one to another, but also insights, right? So one thing that often frustrates me when I'm reading academic papers is that a lot of times academics are great at identifying the problem and kind of explaining, how it's happening or how it's impacting whatever group it is that it's impacting, right? But they're not always great at providing potential solutions, right? And then the private sector side of me is like, okay, great, what do I do with that information, right? So what? So that's, whenever I'm in the academic setting, I'm like, oh my God, guys, great, but like, what do I do with this now? And on the flip side, on the private sector, and again, this is a bit of a generalization, okay? Academics don't all hate me because I'm saying this. And vice versa, right? So on the private sector side, there's often a lot of focus on let's keep moving, let's, push forward without thinking through more cautiously, if you will, all the impacts that whatever you're developing can have, right? Like, what is going to be the impact down the line? Optimizing this algorithm is great, but, what impact is this going to have? Or this product is great in certain situations, but what are the communities that could be potentially negatively affected by it, right? Or who it might be discriminating against, right? Especially if there's no one that from that community in the developing team, right? In the business team that's making that business decision, and so on. So what I would like to, and the policymakers are often kind of caught in between, right? Because if they go to the academics, they just hear a bunch of problems. If they go to private sector, they just hear a bunch of, sort of highly unrealistic, optimistic views of what products can do and how they're all going to change the world because, you're using this particular tool. And in life, in general, things are not quite extremes. They tend to be somewhere in the middle, right? There's risks, there's positive outcomes. It doesn't make sense to say, okay, we're going to stop doing AI because AI could have some potential negative effects, right? We got to understand what those potential negative effects are, because it can also have some very good potential, positive effects. So how can we kind of optimize the good and minimize the negative, right? Which are areas that we say we're not going to go there, we're not going to do this because the negative potential outweighs the positive potential, and so on and so forth. So I think a better collaboration between those three groups and the communities as well, right, which are often left out of the conversation, like the user groups and the communities. They may not be the user of that technology, but are affected, right? Not from sort of end users of or communities of sort of they're impacted by the end product, like for example recidivism algorithms that are particularly discriminatory against people of color and so on, but also communities where data centers are being built, right, and are seeing their energy prices go up, and they're suffering from increased water scarcity and so on, right, all the way to communities that are mining communities where the rare earth minerals and other minerals that are essential to the production of chips and so on that power this whole industry. How do they live and how are they affected by that? So we need to have like a broader discussion and engagement between all of these parts so that we can make legislation, regulation that makes sense, so we can make products that are actually helpful, and that, we can rely on studies from academia and that help us drive actual action.
You just touched so many points that I'd like to try to cover, but I know that it's going to be almost impossible if you want to make it in one episode only. But, and back to Garry's point that, when you mentioned, Garry, that you're probably going to have to go through your compliance department, I think that it makes so much, what makes it even more challenge is to know that the level of literacy around, AI is really, really far from what we need in order for each party to make the best decision that we can, right? So I keep imagining that within a company that you have to go through compliance, and just as an example, if they are already prepared enough to be discussing that from the beginning, right? Or if you're procurement or even the legislators, right? And we see a lot of shocking questions on TV that we assume people already know, but we don't, and the importance around the literacy in here, right?
No, I'm just saying the other interesting dynamic I see is I have a young kid, and kids are very savvy, right? And I guess what I'm getting to is individually we're all trying to acquire more of that knowledge, that understanding, whether it's a policymaker, government, academic, business, and so on. I guess at some point the challenge is, how do we orchestrate it? How do we accelerate that conversation? How do we coordinate it and have more collaboration, as Carmen talked about, so that we can do it more effectively and efficiently and in a more responsible way? So it's almost like we cannot afford not to get involved and to talk about it, right? Because on their own, we can all go off on different tangents, and that may not be the best use of all of our time.
And one thing that I hear a lot too, and I'm sure you hear this a lot as well, Garry, is this idea that regulation hampers innovation, right? And that by regulating, we necessarily are not going to be able to be as innovative or innovative. And that's just a fallacy. And there's arguments, actually Professor Anu Bradford, I never know how to pronounce her first name, so forgive if I mispronounced it. But she was at Columbia, I don't know if she's still there, but she has some great work on this, both articles, and she has a book that I really like called Digital Empires, that it talks about, China and US and Europe, and sort of this like balance of power, if you will, between them on many fronts, between them, between themselves or amongst themselves, but also within each of those regions, right, or countries, between governments and private companies. But anyhow, the point being that, she's an academic, but she does a good job at kind of walking through why that is a fallacy, why that is just like, empirically not the case, that innovation that regulation hampers innovation. That's just not the case, right? So there's many ways or many examples in which regulation and so on actually spurs innovation. So there's a fallacy that, kind of you have to think through whose interest does it benefit to kind of push this rhetoric, right? And to push this kind of idea forward on a global scale, right? What are we missing out? What are we losing out? And what innovation are we losing out on because we're not regulating and so on? Kind of going back a little bit to your point about who wins and who loses in all of this.
Yeah, and I think that at the end it depends on how informed the legislation is based on, and if the correct stakeholders were involved from the beginning and consulted and made part of it. So, and then I completely agree with you. Like when it done it right and properly, there's for sure a way to boost innovation instead of hamper. I completely agree with you. And so, Garry, what would you like to add?
Oh, I was going to say, like, from a doer standpoint, I'm not an academic. I kind of look at standards and policies. They could be an enabler, right? It's almost like it's really hard to do chemistry without the periodic table. It's hard to write a programming language or create poetry without the alphabet. You know what I mean? So that allows us to at least have a baseline protocol to communicate. Imagine there are no security standards. Now I need to ask Carmen the same 50 questions. Maybe I'm off one and the other person asks, that's just like makes it very inefficient. Whereas we have all similar baselines, that's where you have a platform for innovation, right? Maybe that's how I look at it.
I absolutely love that. I couldn't agree more, right? So listen, when I was talking to each one of you individually, right, when we had our intro calls, so you both mentioned the term like responsible AI. And, how we have a couple of responsible AI practices that we really need to put in place. So I would first love to go to the basics. So how do each one of you define responsible AI?
We should start with the academic or the policy person.
Yeah, so not an easy. It's something that should be simple in a way, but it's not. But the way I kind of see responsible AI is developing AI in a way that is not just the product itself, is, how do I say it? Responsible AI is AI that the whole development pipeline of AI is done responsibly. I know it seems a bit obvious, but let's think about this, right? If you developed an AI model and you checked for all your bias metrics and so on and so forth, but you know that the chips that are used to, that you need to run this machine learning algorithm on, right, this AI algorithm on to train your model and so on, were produced using slave labor, both in the manufacturing of the chips themselves, but also all the way, kind of going back to that pipeline, the production pipeline, right, from the minerals to the chips to the data centers where they live and run, right, and that's having negative impacts on the communities in which these data centers are situated, right? That it's stealing the water, is increasing their energy prices and so on. Even if you went about it, your data collection and so on properly, and then the actual generation of the algorithms, and you check for biases and so on and so forth, is this responsible AI? Right? It's kind of like thinking through, an analogy would be, the pipeline for clothes production, right? When you have all these instances of companies that are found to be using slave labor to produce your garments, right? The clothes that you're buying, is it responsible, right? Or you need to think through, from the farming of the cotton and the other, fabrics, that and so on. I guess the flowers and things that generate the fabrics that are then, made into cloth that then is made into clothes, right? So it's really, really hard, right, to kind of get it all right. And to be fair, there's always going to be situations where you just don't know, right? Like, I don't know if the chips that were produced, if the mineral that was, mined to produce the chips was done in a proper way. I may not have any way to find that out, right? So I think of it as trying to look through as much of the pipeline as you can and think at each step, what are the inputs? What is the process that's being done? And what are the outputs? And how are different groups being impacted along the way, right? If I'm thinking about developing any algorithm, what is this going to be used for? Like the actual use that I'm developing it for, but what are potential other uses that it can have that I may not have thought about, right? Because that's not what it was designed for, right? For example, you can use generative AI to create harmless, fun little videos and images and so on. It can also be used to create deep fake nudes and so on of children, right? So what are the safeguards that need to be put in place to avoid the negative applications, right? When I'm thinking about developing an algorithm and I'm looking at the data set that I'm taking as input, is that data set reflective of the population that I'm going to target or I'm going to use? For example, am I looking at a data set that is for, let's say, criminal database, right? But kind of going back to my point, right? So if I'm developing an algorithm and it has facial recognition, right? And my input data is all people that look alike, right? What are the problems with that? Is that okay? Am I creating a facial recognition algorithm for a particular use case where all I want to identify are, for example, white people? And if so, maybe that's okay. Maybe there's a particular use case where that's okay. If I'm doing a general facial recognition, I should probably have in there, or should definitely have in there, a variety of different faces of people with different ages, skin colors, genders, stereotypes, all sorts of things, so that I can generate a model that's going to be accurate as possible, or as descriptive as possible, or as appropriate as possible in its output. So you got to think about it all the way.
It's hard to top that. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with these a bunch of companies that are going through commercialization. I also attended like a policy type forum, as is the organization. The organization is called Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. So I was at the conference. So I sort of had the good fortune of being able to observe it from the policy standpoint all the way down to the practitioners, the people who are doing it. I typically pose the same question, like, what does it mean to be responsible? What is it? And to your point, they all fall along the lines of what Carmen, you mentioned. But one thing that there are a couple of keywords that really come up, at least in these conversations. Number one is trust. So, it's almost like being responsible is a vehicle to building trust, so that you trust the technology. You trust, when you apply for a job and you got denied, you trust that the engine behind it is doing the right way without the biases, as Carmen mentioned. And then as I talk to the founders or the people who are adopting AI and say, what does it mean So I think two key themes come to mind, at least they brought up. One is explainability, and then the other is transparency. So, if I can tell you that, I'm rejecting this applicant's or candidate's application because of maybe a gap in the qualification, a gap in the experience, and so on, like at least we provide some information to explain the basis on which that decision was made, versus a black box saying, no, I don't want you, right? So I think that will go a long way in making the overall AI capability more responsible, building trust along the way. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And the funny thing is that notion of being responsible, not only do the end users benefit from it. So let's say I go to, a shopping site and there's a recommendation engine, or, like I said, the job application. So I for sure will benefit from a more responsible capability. But even on the people building the technology, having responsible AI is actually good. So I was just talking to a founder. They are building a fault detection system, okay, of some manufacturing plants. They take a picture, and then they need to identify where a potential fault is. Imagine, they're trying to train the AI to figure out what is and what is not a fault. It is much better if the tool can explain to them why they think it is a fault, where it's coming from, on what basis it thinks it's a fault. That will allow them to correct the capability, right? So I think what I'm getting to is kind of like an earlier conversation about policies and standards. It can actually help all sides, from users all the way to the developers of the technology.
Yeah, no. So thanks so much for kind of bringing, the kind of keywords that are often used in these conversations around responsible AI, right? Explainability and transparency. The one thing that I want to highlight, though, I think the examples I used were great. It's also very important to, beyond transparency and explainability, actually have the ability to take action, right? What's the agency that people have once they have explainability and transparency. So if for example, there were some cases from, I believe it was New Zealand, where they implemented, some system to kind of automate the decisions around some benefits programs. And they ended up that, there were a lot of issues with this program. A lot of people were denied or accused of having taken money from the government inappropriately and so on. And some people actually, kind of their life and so on, had very drastic result in the end. So even if they had built in a system where it was super transparent, if there was no way for them to kind of appeal that decision, right, then there's no point in a way, right? So is it transparency to understand how the decision was made, or that AI is being used, that AI is thinking of XYZ, let's say, or using this types of information to make a decision, and then the explainability to explain how, so you can understand how the decision was made by the AI, are great. But if there is no sort of fallback mechanism or appeal mechanism, depending on the use case, to kind of go to somebody, resort, challenge that output, then there's no point, right? So what is the actual agency that the people who are mostly affected or by the algorithm, by the AI, or whose AI is, that AI is being applied on, let's say, or affecting as a side effect, do they have any agency to make changes, to raise their hand? Does the person there in the office that decides the benefit, do they have any agency to say, well, yes, and this was an example from I think it was the New Zealand, and forgive if I'm misquoting the country, but part of the problem that they mentioned, people who worked in the government said, well, I used to be the subject matter expert that would make these decisions based on this data that we had, right? I would make just a best guess, right, or informed decision based on my years of experience. And now all of a sudden, my decision doesn't matter anymore because the system is doing the decision for us, and I have no way of overriding it. Even if I look at the data and I see that the decision that the system reached is not the same one that I would have reached, right? And I would consider other factors that the system is not considering. So when that's the case, then transparency and explainability are great, but what is the agency for that person to make a change?
That's so perfectly put. And at the end of the story, who's responsible, right? Where lays the liability here? Who is responsible for that? Are we saying it was the AI if any misjudgment is made? And it also emphasizes the importance of us developing critical thinking, the ability of questioning, because now it's becoming too easy for us just to input and believe on the output without really questioning it, right?
And there's more, right? There's a phenomenon called automation bias, in which humans, all of us, no matter how expert we are on a certain topic, are more inclined to believe something that a machine, an automated system, gives to us. So even if I am an expert on, let's say, chocolate, right? And I query a system and it gives me some answer about chocolate, even when I know that answer to be inaccurate, there oftentimes my tendency is to say, oh, actually, yeah, no, that's right. Even if I kind of know better as an expert. There's, studies that show that. So it's a natural human characteristic, right? It's a natural phenomenon that happens. So as we rely more and more on these tools, right, and we automate more of the decision making, and we kind of remove ourselves from them, right? What are we giving up, right? Not just our ability to think critically, as I mentioned, and we can have a whole other conversation about this, but the agency, right? Our autonomy, our free will, and so on, the very things that make us human in many ways, right? Our creativity. But beyond that is like, if the systems are making decisions and we're just kind of then saying, okay, yes, push the button and take the answer that they give, even though I know better, right? I had no power to override it, then what are we doing?
Oh, I was saying, Carmen, I really like your term, like agency. I'm going to borrow it from now on and use it. But I think...
Go ahead.
It's
just
really,
make sure you credit me.
I'll try my best. But anyways, yes, of course. But I think it's about putting human at the center of it, right? And in some ways, like, you're building AI for humans. Like, this human-centric notion, I think, is such an important element that many of us lose sight of at times.
Yeah. So agency also is perfectly put, Carmen, and thinking about that, maybe one of the safeguards that we've been mentioning, and who knows, just an idea, is going to be similar to what is done with clinical studies, right? That you always need a pair checking. We always need to have several different people checking it to make sure that, okay, this is actually, safeguard. This is actually have all the needed operating whatever guidelines that is, to make it something that people can question, people can go back to the system, people can input information again, and even be more responsible for that. Garry, I remember when we were talking before, and we were covering ethics, right? You frame AI ethics as a competitive advantage. So maybe whichever player is out there that is offering AI solutions and that can actually prove that it's done in a responsible and ethical way, that is going to be a competitive advantage. And then the best scenario is that it's going to be one of those market forces that are pushing you in this direction, just as we are seeing into being more responsible regarding climate and making a positive impact, right? So how do you see that?
To your point, I think I totally agree. It's almost like you walk into a restaurant, the place is clean, the bathroom is clean, the tablecloth is nicely ironed. Like, if people take good care of what they're building, what they are offering, they know what they're doing, they can explain, they put humans in the loop. I think that shows well. That shows that these are serious people building serious technologies, right? And if they say, no, this is just a black box, I build a wrapper around such and such a LLM, I don't know what's going on, as them, I think I would be less inclined to buy from that second person, right? So I for sure will be able, I for sure will tend to go with those that are clear about the roadmap, about what they want to do, how they want to bring, agency and all that into the loop. I for sure, no question about that.
I agree with what Garry said. I would kind of go back to the point of trust again, right? Because when you develop something ethically, and people, the kind of also connects back to reputational risk, right? If people can't trust, right, you build your reputation. If I stay here, get up here and say a whole bunch of nonsense about AI, right? And then I try to then go somewhere else and say a whole bunch of nonsense about AI, I'm not building a very good reputation, right? I'm not going to be hired to be talking about AI. So if you're developing products that are not done ethically, that's going to be reflected in the outputs that you produce, right? And the side effects that your tools have and the impact that they have at large, right? In society at large and the environment and so on and so forth. And then, hopefully that will be reflected in the reputation that you have, and people will kind of move away from your product. So I tie back to trust and reputational risk.
Perfect. So listen, I know that we are out of time, so I have one last question for you. Garry, you're going to be the first because I know that you have to run, right? So one last question. If you could change one thing in the way AI is being developed today, what would it be?
Put more humans in the loop.
Perfect. Carmen?
You give me the last, harder.
You have the last word.
I do have the last word. So if I could change one thing about how it's being done, right, I would kind of go back to what we've just been discussing in terms of putting everyone together, right? The academics, the communities that are impacted, and the industry professionals, and also the policymakers, right? I really think we need to increase AI literacy, to your point earlier. We really need people to understand what's going on, how these tools are built. And this goes from, for the people who are using it, the people who are developing, the business leaders that are making decisions, and the engineers and the policymakers and so on, right? People really need to understand what are the stakes. And I really believe that by educating yourselves and by understanding how things work is how we can take sort of appropriate action, right? For example, I have a master's in data science. Ethics was a part of one class. We didn't talk about these things. Right, so we're training engineers and data scientists and people who are developing computer scientists and so on, people who are developing AI systems, without having them be trained on this. Think through the products that they're developing, the impacts that they can have. Right, we've kind of historically separated. We've done many things in education that I kind of take issue with, but we've separated sciences and humanities. Right, either you're a science person and you do research and so on, and you think mathy ways and so on, like the way I've kind of always identified myself in many ways, or you're a humanities person and you think about history and you think about the sociology and anthropology and these philosophy and these kind of questions, right? And they don't talk to each other, but we need to change that because business leaders need to understand the technology better in the process for generating so that they can make better, more ethical business decisions. Engineers and so on and scientists need to understand the impact of, in society of the things that they're developing, right? Because more and more of these things are intertwined. So we really need to kind of talk to each other again and to have a more well-rounded education for all of us. We need to understand how these things actually work and the impact that they're having so that we can make a change.
Instead of just keep rushing out of it, right? That's perfect. Carmen, as you know, we had so many other questions, but not enough time. So who knows? Maybe we have room for future episodes. Thank you so much for being here with us, Carmen and Garry. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.